Members of the university, the reason for my speaking to you today is that Mr. Warwick Nelson invited me to address a general meeting of the Monash Association of Students. But it occurred to me that perhaps more students could be reached through our closed-circuit television system, and so I hope that you're able both to see and hear me adequately. I'm only sorry to have interrupted a lecture, but I thought the occasion was sufficiently important to make that worthwhile. Some of you will know that I've been abroad recently, and I wanted to start what I have to say by reading a small passage from my report to Council, which describes some of the scenes in universities, particularly in America and Canada, that came to my notice. To make a series of visits to universities in different parts of the world in 1969 is to undertake a journey which has some of the nightmare qualities of science fiction. The Triffids are springing up everywhere, and no one knows how to keep them in check, still less how to cut them down. But this is not a nightmare, alas, from which one can awaken into the clean morning of a sane and orderly world. Everywhere, the harsh reality is of universities under attack, in chaos, closed or open only under police protection. Everywhere, the reality is of student rebellion, sometimes violent, sometimes encouraged or even stimulated by a minority of academics, not infrequently aggravated by real deficiencies in the university system. It often springs from passionate hatred of social injustice, and especially for the war in Vietnam. It is usually unaffected by that other war that students fought and lost in Czechoslovakia. Now, the pattern of events in various countries is depressingly similar. Some of you may have seen an article called The Anatomy of Student Revolt, which appeared in the Monash Reporter recently, and if not, you might be interested to read it. But briefly, what happens is that demands are made for the instantaneous solution of one or more student grievances. If the demand is met, then a new one immediately takes its place. The demands are pressed provocatively, sometimes with intimidation, insults, obscenities, or all three, in the hope that the university authorities will react in a heavy-handed manner. As soon as that happens, the issue changes and becomes one of repression. Then, with the aid of meetings, speeches, leaflets, television, an excited atmosphere is built up in which rumors and suspicion flourish, and the truth disappears from view. At a propitious moment, a building may be occupied or some other violent act take place, and with any luck, the police are brought in. Some students are manhandled. All hell breaks out. Finally, the university is closed, the president resigns. There must be an amnesty, of course, for all the students concerned. Then everyone goes back to the beginning, you get a new president if you can, and the cycle starts again. You may think that I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. This pattern has happened in literally hundreds of universities around the world. And for this reason, people are asking whether it is now starting in Australia, with Monash as the first example. Before attempting to answer that question, let me complete the picture by describing the participants in all this. The militant students are revolutionaries, whose object it is to destroy the university because it is the most accessible and vulnerable section of capitalist society. Within the militant group, there may well be different factions with different aims. For instance, the black and white radicals in America are often at daggers drawn, sometimes literally. Then there is the great bulk of moderate students, who naturally have plenty of grievances with the university and with society generally, who are very properly concerned about injustice and poverty and racialism and war, but who would normally not react violently against the system, but would endeavor through democratic means to change it, unless they were manipulated into doing so. And finally, there is the university machine itself, which in this country consists mainly of the academic staff, who are organized into a rather cumbersome system of departments and faculties. Typically, there are also lay members of faculty boards and on the main governing body, the council. The whole organization is rather cumbersome, slow-moving, conservative, in the sense of seeking to protect the institution from over-rapid change, and hence completely unsuited to conduct guerrilla warfare, so that it is no wonder that it is comparatively easy to destroy the institution. Well, if you've been with me so far, you'll see that some of the features of what is happening elsewhere can be seen in Monash already. Certainly, we have a revolutionary group which seeks by every possible means to stir up trouble. Certainly, issues have been found and pressed and changed in the way that I've described as occasion requires. At the present time, these issues center around the discipline statute, which, as everybody knows, has been under review for a long time and which is still a matter for discussion and indeed controversy. It is a complicated statute. It's not well understood, certainly not by students and not even by a large number of academics who have not worked their way slowly, clause by clause. It has taken a long time to get to the present stage, and it will take longer still to finish it off in a satisfactory manner. But it provides a wonderful opportunity for issues to be selected and for the issues to be changed as occasion requires. First, it was the double jeopardy issue. Should students be subjected both to the discipline of the public courts as well as to university discipline if they get into trouble of some kind? Nobody really thought this out very carefully. Does double jeopardy mean double trial or double punishment or what? But you see, this is the kind of issue that can easily be used to arouse opposition. Then more recently, there has been argument whether students who were charged with certain offenses should be brought before the discipline committee in the vacation. Should the hearing be open or not? Should it be an individual series of hearings, or should the defendants all be brought together in one trial? Should it be in accordance with the new statute or the old, and so on? This gives you an illustration of the way in which issues can be selected according to which happens to be most convenient. Some of the demands were sensible. For example, I agree that it was better to hold the hearings of the discipline committee during the term than during the vacation, even though it did lead to some trouble. Some of the demands are much less sensible. For example, that the hearings should be on television. If you were sitting here in this studio with me at the moment, you will know that it is quite impossible to contemplate spending a whole day under arc lights like this. Nor is it sensible to talk about an open hearing, at least in the sense of a public trial. The technique is to pick the issue most likely to produce public support, especially if it can be misrepresented in some way. And the example of an open hearing, which I shall say a little bit more about in a moment, is a perfect example of that. Now I'd like to take you through a sequence of some of the recent events which have disturbed this university. And I begin with the incidents of July the 14th, when the members of the University Council who came into the university offices for a meeting were prevented from getting into the council chamber. This was, in my opinion, a very serious event which marked a change in the situation in Monash, which was very, very serious indeed, because it was the first time that any appearance of violence occurred. Members of council were physically prevented from getting into the council chamber on the pretext that all that was being demanded was that council should receive a deputation to discuss the discipline statute. Now this, of course, was perfectly silly because the council is not in a position to discuss the discipline statute at the present time because it hasn't gone through the various processes which are necessary before it gets to council. And in fact, that issue was just a pretext, and the object was to force a way into the council chamber. May I say just a little bit about the way in which the discipline statute is at present being handled? There is a drafting committee which is studying the statute and the related one on the status of students, and there is a student negotiating committee which is discussing the various contentious issues. I think I should point out to you that at many recent meetings, ever since I came back from abroad, in fact, all the staff members of this joint committee have been present, but the students have been sadly underrepresented. If this is what is called honest negotiation, then I'm surprised. Going back to the council meeting, in face of the threatening situation and the refusal by students to disperse, the council meeting had to be abandoned. There were many members of the press present, a good many photographs were taken, and all the students who could be identified on those photographs have been charged with an appropriate offence. There has been an accusation that only certain well-known students have been so charged, but of course the fact is that some students are a lot better known than others, so it's not surprising that they got swept in. But I can assure you that every student who could be identified has been charged. Now I come to the discipline meetings of the discipline committee at which these charges were investigated. I've mentioned briefly the demand for an open hearing, and of course on the at first one reacts very favorably to such a proposition, except that it is not, in my view, appropriate, and this was the view that the discipline committee itself decided, because it is their prerogative to take a decision. It is not appropriate to have a public trial. But the discipline committee did agree to admit 9 observers, 7 students and 2 members of staff. And thus there was no attempt at concealment whatever, one of the student members being the editor of Lot's Wife. So that any accusation that this was a Star Chamber trial in secret is absolutely unfair and incorrect. Nevertheless, the demand for an open hearing continued to be pressed, and on the day when the committee was meeting the other day, the large numbers of students were milling around outside the council chamber, and eventually the students pushed their way past the attendants, forced open the door of the council chamber, burst in and disrupted the meeting of the discipline committee. And at that point, Professor Manton, who was in the chair, postponed the meeting until next week. I think you'll see, if you just consider these various incidents one after the other, that they're all of a pattern with student demonstrations everywhere. And the object is to provoke reaction. This is the aim, in the hope that the university will react in a violent manner. Now I want to touch briefly on the events of yesterday, when a visit that I made to Sir Henry Bolte attracted a good deal of attention. Sir Henry himself has described quite accurately what went on, and all I want to say is to confirm precisely that he was accurate in his report. The visit itself was a formal one. I made an appointment to call on Sir Henry after his return from abroad because I thought that likely that as he and I had both been in America recently and had seen something of the university situation there, that we might have things to discuss, and indeed that was the case. Naturally, the talk continued to the situation in Australia and particularly in Monash, and from then we went on to discuss the budgetary position that we are likely to be in next year in the light of the AUC recommendations, which are shortly to be released. There has been a suggestion that I went to obtain emergency powers of some kind, and I want to say a little bit about that, because of course the situation now is such that the whole position of the university is one that gives the professorial board and the council, and indeed the public generally, a very great anxiety. And at a recent meeting of the professorial board, there was a discussion as to whether the present discipline statute is adequate or whether the Vice-Chancellor or other individuals should seek emergency powers of some kind. As I see things at the present time, I see no reason why I should seek such extraordinary powers, and I did not do so yesterday. In my opinion, the discipline statute under which we are at present operating, and which must be used until the new statute is completed and brought into legislation, the present discipline statute is quite adequate, and it is certainly fair. Let me read you the appropriate parts of the statute. First of all, an earlier statute refers to the constitution of the Discipline Committee, which at the present time consists of the Vice-Chancellor and the deans of the several faculties. 3 members of the committee shall form a quorum. And I interpolate here to say that one of the provisions of the new draft statute is that there shall be students on the Discipline Committee, and I very much hope that it will be possible to bring this into operation before very long. Turning now to the general provisions for discipline, the Discipline Committee may impose such penalties as it deems appropriate for breaches of discipline or acts of misconduct, including A, excluding the student from the university permanently or for such lesser period as it may decide, B, a fine not exceeding $100, or C, the annulment of a student's attempt at an examination or series of examinations in cases of misconduct at university examinations. Now, this is not to say that penalties of that severity will be imposed, but it is to say that the powers of the committee extend as far as that, should it prove to be necessary, and if the cases brought before it are both proved and found to be sufficiently serious. Going on a little further, the statute says that in every case when a student is accused of a breach of discipline or of misconduct, he shall have the right to be notified in writing of the terms of the accusation with all proper particulars, and to be heard, and to call evidence. And finally, I just want to quote the section about appeals. So any person aggrieved by a decision made under this statute may appeal to the Discipline Committee, that refers to the powers of individuals, which shall hear such appeal and may impose such penalties as it deems to be appropriate. Any person aggrieved by a decision of the Discipline Committee may appeal to the Council, or to a committee thereof appointed by the Council for that purpose. So that there is, I think you will agree, adequate opportunity for a fair hearing and for a subsequent appeal. And of course, in the last resort, nobody can prevent an appeal to the courts. This is a slow-moving operation, and it takes a long time to put that machine into motion. But in my view, it is adequate and it is fair, and I do not at present see any need to think of going beyond it. There's been some comment on the recent resolution of the Professorial Board giving me support for any action that I may think it necessary to take at the present time. I place very great value upon support of that kind, because to have the whole body of professors behind one gives one a feeling of understanding with and community with our academic colleagues, which is most important to me at the present time. But again, I repeat that what that means is that the Professorial Board was encouraging me to make use of the discipline statute whenever I felt it to be appropriate. I want now to speak a little bit about the effect of all these incidents on our university and upon the general body of students. There seem to me to be 3 possibilities before us. We may, and I think it's no use refusing to face this, we may follow the course that other universities all around the world have followed, and eventually reach such a state of chaos that we have to close. We may continue in a state of conflict as we are at present, with the affairs of the university occupying the television and the newspapers. This, as you must be aware, produces a public reaction against this university, which can hardly fail to be harmful to students who graduate from it. And finally, there is what I am devoting all my powers and energy to bring about, and that is to restore a state of affairs in which the student grievances and points of view can be sensibly discussed, negotiated about, and finally brought into legislation. This is a situation that prevailed in the university until fairly recently, and during that time it was possible here to make a lot of progress with the way in which the student voice could be heard. At the present time, we have a Commission on University Affairs which is sitting for the express purpose of finding out about student reaction to the present situation in the university, and which is at present preparing a report which will make recommendations on how the situation might be improved. I do not wish to give the impression that I believe that the university is anything but in need of continuing review of its affairs. As you know, we've grown extremely rapidly. Our arrangements have in many cases been improvised. The discipline statute is a case in point. And there is plenty of work to be done to improve our arrangements. But this can only be achieved by creative consultation among the parties concerned, and it can only be impaired and retarded by the present disturbed situation. There is no doubt at all in my mind, as I go about the country and talk to people, that serious damage has already been done to the reputation of this university. People are all too ready to forget the enormous amount of good work that is being done in the university in departments all over the place, and to think that nothing happens here except the kind of disturbances that they read about in the papers. This continual reference to unrest here has put a stigma upon the name of Monash that will take a long time to get off. And I think that the students who are currently working here in the hope of obtaining their degrees and going out in the world to pursue their careers cannot fail to be anxious about how their degrees will be regarded in the world outside. We must work to restore the reputation that our degrees have hitherto had. And to that end, the moderate student body must consider what they themselves can and must do. You have at the present time an organization in the Monash Association of Students which is perfectly devised for manipulation by a minority. And it is in fact so being used, as you will all realize. You must get a better constitution for that organization. But in the present time, the only way in which you can make common sense prevail is by turning up at meetings and making sure that sensible motions are passed. In order to do this, you've got to try to find out the facts of the situation and not to be misled by manipulation of the facts and by misrepresentation of the situation. You've got to resist stupid demands. And until the moderate student body organizes itself to do this, we shall be in our present state of jeopardy. It isn't easy to find out the facts, and to that end I've instituted various measures which I hope will become increasingly effective so that students may know what is really going on. But a great deal of work or a great deal of responsibility to find out about the facts rests on you. Well, I think that's all I want to say by way of a speech. There are a number of questions that have reached me which I propose to answer now. But before I close, I just want to say this. 10 years ago, there was no university here. The place where I am at this present time sitting was an open paddock. In that time, we have built up a great university. The present student body is close to 10,000. We have about nearly 1,000 academics and another 1,000 employees of various kinds. This is a tremendous accomplishment of which all of us who have been associated with it are tremendously proud. Do not let it be destroyed. It would be an awful tragedy if that were to happen. Let me now just deal with one or two questions that have reached me before I close. I want, first of all, to refer to a letter which reached me anonymously and which distressed me very much, because it closes like this. A measure of just how much I am intimidated by all the discipline legislation is that I have typed rather than written this letter to you, and that I am not signing my name to it. Now, if the person who wrote that letter will make an appointment and come and see me, I hope to be able to convince him that the very last thing that I or any of my colleagues want to do is to intimidate students. On the contrary, all our efforts are bent to encouraging students to cooperate and to collaborate in the running of the university. Here are one or two questions. How does Council propose to ascertain student opinions and objections? This seems very important. May students who are sufficiently interested speak directly to Council, and if so, how do they go about doing this? Well, now, to answer the last part of the question first, it would, of course, I think you'll see, be quite impossible for Council to receive a long queue of students at every meeting with questions. The whole idea of the governing system of this university is that it is a representative one. And there are means by which Council can, in fact, provide an answer to student questions through the normal communication system. First of all, let me refer to the Act which constitutes the Council, the Act of the Victorian Parliament. The Council may, if it thinks fit by statute, provide for the election by students in the university, in accordance with the statute, of not more than 2 persons to be members of the Council. What has been done, in fact, is for the election at the present time of one such person elected by the students. This is Mr. Ken Murphy just now. And currently, steps are being taken to provide for the second. The Council has declared its intention, when it's possible to change the legislation, for a third person to be elected by the student body. And this is these persons, at the present time, Mr. Murphy, this is your route to Council. And it is possible for the student opinion to reach Council through your representative, and for Council's views to get back to the student body through your representative. I've already mentioned the Commission on University Affairs, which is sitting at the present time, and which of course contains students as well as staff, and an open invitation to all members of the university was given to attend meetings of the Commission and to give evidence. The purpose of this was for the precise purpose of conveying student and staff opinion to Council in the form of recommendations about changes in government. I'm sorry to say that this invitation to use the Commission for that purpose wasn't sufficiently taken advantage of, but nevertheless, I think some progress was made. Now, may I go on to another question? This refers to the discipline and status of student statutes to which I referred earlier. A question is, I find section 17.3, that is the one in the status of student statutes, which refers to the power of a status committee to review conditions under which students may be admitted to the university after having been convicted of a criminal offence. I find Section 17.3 quite objectionable, and it leaves too much to the discretion of the Status Committee. It has been suggested that the whole of the academic staff is unanimously opposed to 17.3. But I think I should like to say this, that while there are obviously considerable opinion against it, there is a substantial body of opinion for it. And the reason that it is so controversial is, of course, that it is trying to face up to a very real problem. Now, in legislation of this kind, in the end, you have to rely on somebody to interpret the legislation. And whatever you say, whatever is written down, in the end, a court of some kind has got to make an interpretation. And that is the purpose of the Status Committee, which again provides for student membership and whose duty it would be to review the evidence. But I think I should say this, that it's clear that there are serious disadvantages in 17.3, and the drafting committee is currently engaged in seeing whether the earlier provisions in the discipline statute can be modified so as to make 17.3 unnecessary. But I would like you to know that there is no intention on my part or anybody else's of forcing through this legislation in that form. The whole object is to continue to discuss and negotiate until a satisfactory result can be achieved. Finally, a question that I really find a little surprising, but I'll read it out. Incidentally, just who are the members of council? Surprising as it may sound, I can nowhere find an enumeration of the composition by name of this all-important but remote and unapproachable body. I am sure that such information must be publicly, that is, to students, available, and that I am at fault here, but the fact remains, who comprises council? Well, the constitution of council is set out in the calendar, and if there aren't a lot of copies of that around the university, I should be very surprised. And on page 108, the constitution of council, which is substantially an elected one, is set out. And the actual names of the members are contained right at the beginning. So that we start on page 27 with the names of the members of council. Of course, they don't convey very much by themselves, but you can usually find out who they are from who's who or in some other way. But in order to throw some light on that apparently obscure question, I did have an article inserted in Lot's Wife, I think right at the beginning of the year, describing who the members of council actually are. So I want to conclude on this question of communication and information. This is a very complicated organization, and it is extremely difficult indeed to convey to the student body generally and the staff accurate information on what is happening and how it all works. Some of it is to be found in publications like the council, like the calendar. Some of it, from time to time, is to be found in publications like the Monash Reporter or in the articles that are inserted in Lot's Wife. But in a university, one relies a good deal upon oral communication. And so if students have any questions to which they want answers, for goodness sake, let them ask the academic staff with whom they come in contact and get an accurate answer and not rely upon inaccurate rumor and unreliable publication. Thank you very much for listening to me. Mr. Warwick Nelson has just come in, and he would like to make an announcement to you about the general meeting situation. Mr. Nelson.
Just to make a short announcement, the Monash Association of Students has called a meeting for 1 o'clock in the forum between the Ming Wing and the Union building. Dr. Matheson has indicated that he's prepared to come along and answer questions from the floor of the meeting, questions that probably were prompted from today's lecture you've just heard. the procedure will be, we'll start probably about 1:05. Dr. Matheson will answer questions, and then we'll proceed with debate on motions. I would ask that motions that are to be debated at the meeting this afternoon be handed at the Mass office by about 12:15, so that we can get them run off, so that everybody has a copy before them.
Is it possible to get advance notice for some of the questions?
Yes, well, that's the point. If people have formulated the questions, in fact, I would imagine everybody who wants to ask a question could have it written, and also at the Mass office by about 12:15, so that Dr. Matheson has at least some warning and some idea of the nature of the questions that he'll be asked. So both questions and motions to be at the Mass office by 12:15 for a meeting at 1:15 in the forum. Thank you.